Yeah, no, and I'm wondering if this is also a good spot to just discuss like the news media and how it's handling coverage of Israeli and Iranian strikes because of your piece in the Gazette. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more of how you feel the news media is handling this overall.
You talking about the connection between Iraq and Iran?
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so the you know I teach history, so I've always hated the saying that history repeats itself. I mean, I think it kind of resembles itself, and history can be helpful in seeing how things resemble themselves. In terms of a media strategy, there's a lot that's the same here, but there are some things that are different, and I think Dickey hit upon it in the last segment, which is typically governments, including the United States government, although we're not unique, will fearmonger and lie to their population to convince their population to support a war. Then we enter a war. At some point, millions have died, civilizations have been destroyed, money has been spent, and then the truth comes out, and the public turns against the war, and press and historians pat themselves on the back for getting the story right. Like that's typically kind of the story, and I can if anybody wants online, I can send them how that's the story of World War One. That's the story of Vietnam. It's the story of Spanish American War, the first Gulf War, and the Iraq War. People forget that it didn't start in late 2002 that Bush targeted Iraq. It was about an 18-month campaign to convince the public to invade Iraq. What's interesting, so a lot of that is happening here with Iran, right? We've already talked about that there is fear mongering about the Iranian people. They're promising that we can do regime change there. There's a lot of disrespect for their culture, saying they're backward, particularly in their treatment of women, so that justifies us bombing them. And again, I'm not defending any culture. I just think that you can't bomb your way to social justice. So a lot of those narratives I think have been the same. But what's really you know interesting about what Trump has done here, though, Trump, as Dickey said, didn't have public opinion on his side when he went in to bomb Iran, and that's really a break with history. He's sure the lies were there, and CNN and Fox News, right, left, center, Democrat, Republican media have all given some tepid justification for it at one level or another, but the public really didn't tilt. They didn't wait till that. He kind of jumped the gun on that, and so that to me is what's different about this war thus far. But historically speaking, and I hate to say this as someone who hates war and has spent a lot of his life fighting against the lies of war, typically American public gets on board with war. They like war. They're an easy sell for it, and so I think politically speaking, Trump probably feels pretty confident he can get that support.
And why do you feel like that is? Like, what do you, because right now, when we're looking at polls, when we're seeing research about the public's even interest or to get out of the war, a lot of people are saying, I think right now, what I saw was like 16, only 16% of people are like for the war. What would you say is the incentive behind, or what do you think has been the stereotypical message that people get behind?
I think there's a multitude of factors. I mean, patriotism is a big one. A lot of folks want to feel like they're the World War II generation defeating the Nazis, and
Mhm.
that's really powerful in our American imagination. We have towering figures like George Washington that are celebrated by large swaths of our population, and so being able to like tie yourself to that legacy means a lot to a lot of people. There's also fear, is a big one. The idea that someone's going to nuke us off the map, whether it's true, is irrelevant. If people believe it's true, they're willing to send people to die. So I think those are some of like the big critical factors, and then also people's emotions and critical thinking are often scrambled in times of war. So
Mhm.
we conflate supporting the troops with supporting the war, but look at anytime you poll people in the military, the opposite is true. Those in the military say, I'll sign up to do anything for you, but please do your part as an American citizen and read and protest those in power and only send me to war if it's absolutely necessary. But a lot of folks forget that in time of war because they're so propagandized with the patriotism and the fear.
Mm.
They start to make those decisions. And again, I know this is going to sound like I'm picking on one side of the political aisle, but this is, statistically across the board. This is not just a Republican issue. And it's not a modern phenomenon. I mean, you can go back, like probably the most, we don't have polling at the time, but probably the most contentious war, absent the Civil War, obviously, in American history is probably like the Mexican American War. That one, it was a tough sell. They didn't have a lot of the propagandistic technologies that they would have later. And so there was a strong opposition to that war that almost, looked like 50-50 in the country. But after the Civil War, usually you can get a substantive majority on board.
Absolutely. And something I'll add really quick before Dickey, we jump over to you is I feel like as we're talking about this, I'm also thinking about how many authors I've read who've talked about war who also highlight like the alienation of another population of people. And it's
Mm.
this kind of dehumanization that happens of we are more important humans than them, or we deserve to live more than them. And I think that that is such a focal point when it comes to narrative analysis too, and understanding like when we see people, do we see them as like brothers and mothers and people who love people, or are we seeing them as like quote unquote enemies? And I think that that's something that I see a lot when it comes to media, and something I try to be mindful of, especially in my work of like mental health, well-being, media analysis. Like how are we framing people, and do we have empathy for the people that we're framing, or do we understand them as humans and people who feel and understand the world like we do?
Hey, Detoxers. Thanks for tuning in to the Disinfo Detox. If you're enjoying the content, head over to nolanhigdon.substack.com for full access to the podcast as well as other original essays. Want to support the Detox? Consider becoming a paid subscriber. You'll get early and exclusive access to interviews, podcasts, essays, and more. If a subscription's not in the cards for you right now, no worries. Just like, share, subscribe, comment, and follow. It helps grow the audience and spread the word. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and keep detoxing the disinfo.